G'day sawdust makers. In a few minutes I'm going to show you how I doubled the kitchen space in this apartment with some affordable construction grade 2x4s, or 90x45 as we call it, and a little bit of extra elbow grease. If you are going to make a bench top like this or something similar, there is one incredibly important tip to follow, and I'll get onto that in a couple of minutes. But that one tip will be the difference between you making a bench top or a split twisty. If you are going to use cheap materials like this, you want to be picky. I opened up a fresh pack and was able to select the lengths I wanted that were straight and had character and grain. So I laid them all out to get some diversity in grain and colour. Double check my notes. I don't want to screw up my measurements. Measure twice, cut once. Mark out each piece with about an extra 20mm to give myself some wiggle room after glue up, and then just start cutting them to length. Now we want to get rid of those rounded edges so we have a perfectly flat bench top. There are probably a few ways you could achieve this, but I ripped them on the table saw. Then I ran it edgeways and faceways through the thicknesser to get them perfectly even and smooth so there'd be no gaps when gluing them all together. Made sure my clamps were perfectly level for glue up because I did not want a twisted, uneven board. Arranged them in an order so the top had a lot of character. Then a good amount of glue. You don't have to go overboard with the glue, but you do want decent coverage. I use Type Bond 3 here. It's a good quality glue, it's waterproof, and I know it'll hold up. And then piece it together. And clamp. And look at that! You have to admit it looks great compared to what we started with. There are a few open knots that I filled with putty, easy enough. Now it's time to get the edges square and cut off the excess so it is the required size. I clamped my level down as a guide so I could just use my circular saw. But before I cut into it, I changed the blade to my fancy Makita Blue Mac so it'd have a much cleaner cut that would just look schmiggo. And then sand and sand and sand. 100 grit, 180 grit, 240 grit. Some little bench protectors under there. And then I even went over it with 800 grit. Bust out the trim router for that clean penciled edge, and then hand sand that edge just to perfection.
Beautiful!
Now get every speck of dust off it. You need a super clean surface before varnish. And then... Shake, shake, shake. Shake, shake, shake. Shake your booty. Yeah, look, sorry about that. But, stir and then apply it. I would have preferred a much bigger brush for this job, but you live and learn. I had a whole lot of these little brushes lying around. Now, if you're enjoying this, please subscribe, click the bell for notifications. And after its first coat, it's looking pretty good. The grain is starting to pop and the knots add a heap of character. And then a very light sand at 240 grit just to take some of the imperfections out. When you use varnish, if a speck of dust lands on it when it's wet, it dries like a speed hump, so a light sand will keep those bits in check. And then another coat of varnish, and another light sand, and another coat of varnish. In all I had 5 full coats because I really just want this thing to last a lifetime. Now, if you are going to attempt this, there is one really important factor you need to adhere to. When gluing a panel like this, you must alternate the grain. See what I mean here? They're all going different directions. Make sure the grain is different or opposite for each piece. If the grain follows the same direction as the piece next to it, it will cup and you'll end up with a canoe instead of a bench top. And then bingo! Some decent kitchen cupboards from Bunnings, the Kaboodle range, some space for cookbooks, and a sweet looking bench top. Only a couple $100 all up, and this inner city apartment just doubled its kitchen space. Now you might ask, why did I use cheap timber? Well, I like to challenge myself. I like to do things a little bit differently, and I certainly don't like paying more for something when you don't need to. I made this for a very dear friend of mine. She's an absolute inspiration, so I really enjoyed this build. And the blonde colour of the pine matched well with all the other furniture in her apartment. Thank you for watching. I'd love to get your opinion on this, good or bad, so jump in the comments section and let me know what you would do differently. Thanks again.